What if I told you that a small-town mechanic inherited a beat-up school bus from her grandmother, and what she transformed it into changed the lives of an entire generation of forgotten kids? This isn't just a story about rusted metal or abandoned vehicles. It's about dreams buried under decades of neglect. A mobile classroom that defied every rule in the education system. And one woman, with nothing but a wrench, an unshakable belief in children, and the courage to drive straight into a broken system that had given up on hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is how Maya Rodriguez took a 1970s school bus destined for the scrapyard and built something inside it that would challenge everything we thought we knew about learning. Don't look away. Sometimes the most powerful classrooms have wheels. But before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our community worldwide. Let's get started. The letter arrived on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday in Maya Rodriguez's life. Oil-stained, predictable, and quietly desperate. She'd been under the hood of a 2015 Honda Civic for 3 hours, fighting with a stubborn alternator that seemed to teach her patience she didn't have. At 28, Maya had inherited more than just her grandmother's mechanical aptitude. She'd inherited the weight of expectations that felt heavier than any engine block she'd ever lifted. The envelope was cream-colored, formal, but the kind of letterhead that made working-class people nervous. Rodriguez and Associates, Estate Planning. Maya wiped her hands on a shop rag that had seen better decades and tore it open, expecting medical bills or final notices, the usual aftermath of losing someone who'd raised you on Social Security and stubbornness. Instead, she found something that stopped her cold. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, as per the final wishes of Elena Rodriguez, you are hereby named the sole beneficiary of the following assets. The list was short. The house she'd grown up in, mortgaged to the foundation, a savings account with $347.82, and one item that made her laugh out loud in the empty garage. One 1973 Bluebird school bus, currently located at Meadowbrook Storage, Unit 47. Maya stared at the paper. A school bus. Her grandmother, who'd spent 40 years as a crossing guard and never driven anything bigger than her ancient Buick, had somehow acquired a school bus. It felt like Elena's final joke, the kind of gentle mischief she'd been known for in their small Oregon town of Willowbrook. Willowbrook wasn't the kind of place people wrote songs about. Nestled between failing timber mills and endless rain, it was a town where dreams came to die quietly. The main street had more empty storefronts than occupied ones, and the local high school graduation rate hovered around 60%. Not because the kids weren't smart, but because hope was a luxury most families couldn't afford. Maya had grown up here, raised by Elena after her parents died in a logging accident when she was 8. Elena Rodriguez had been a force of nature, disguised as a 4'11" crossing guard with silver hair and eyes that saw straight through excuses. She'd taught Maya that broken things weren't meant to stay broken. They were meant to be understood, fixed, and made better than they were before. Mija, Elena used to say, while Maya watched her repair everything from toasters to neighbors' broken hearts. Your hands can build miracles if your heart knows why it matters. 3 days later, Maya stood in front of Storage Unit 47, key trembling in her hand. The metal door groaned as she lifted it, and there it was, a school bus that looked like it had been through a war and lost. The yellow paint had faded to something that resembled old mustard. Rust bloomed across its sides like angry flowers, and one of the back windows was held together with duct tape and prayers. But it was massive, 40 feet of potential wrapped in decay. Maya climbed aboard through a door that squeaked like a dying bird. The interior was a time capsule of neglect. Cracked vinyl seats, exposed wiring, and a floor so warped that she could feel it give under her boots. The smell hit her immediately. Rust, mildew, and something else. Something that reminded her of Elena's house after it rained. Memory. She made her way to the driver's seat, hands trailing along the metal frame. That's when she found it. A mandala envelope taped under the dashboard, her name written across it in Elena's careful script. Inside was a single photograph and a letter. The photograph was black and white, decades old, showing a young Elena standing beside this same bus. But it wasn't yellow then. It was painted a deep blue, and the sides were covered with vibrant murals of books, stars, and children's faces. A banner across the front read Elena's Learning Express in bold white letters. Maya's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, then you found my greatest secret and my biggest regret. This bus was my dream before life convinced me to dream smaller. In 1975, I bought it with every penny I'd saved, planning to create a mobile classroom for the children in our logging camps, kids whose families moved too much for traditional school, who fell through every crack the system had to offer.
But then the regulations came. Insurance requirements I couldn't meet, certifications I couldn't afford. The school board called it unauthorized education. The state called it a liability. One by one, they built walls I couldn't climb, and eventually, I had to stop. I painted over the murals, parked it here, and went back to being just a crossing guard. But I never sold it, Maya. I couldn't, because every time I looked at it, I remembered that for 6 months, I proved something important. That learning doesn't need 4 walls and a blessing from bureaucrats. It needs someone who cares enough to drive straight into the darkness and turn on a light. You have your father's heart and my hands. You see broken things and imagine what they could become. This bus is broken, Mija, but it's not finished. The children in our community are still falling through cracks, bigger ones now. The education system has less money, less hope, less room for kids who don't fit their molds. Maybe it's time for Elena's Learning Express to ride again. Maybe it's time for someone with stronger hands and a fiercer heart to finish what I started. Or maybe this is just an old woman's dream and you'll sell it for scrap metal. Either way, it's yours now. Do with it what your heart tells you. All my love and all my hope. Abuela Elena. P.S. Check under the back seat. I left you some tools to get started. Maya sat in that driver's seat for an hour, reading the letter 3 times, staring at the photograph, and feeling something she hadn't felt since Elena died. Purpose. Under the back seat, she found a toolbox she'd never seen before, filled with specialized equipment, welding tools, electrical supplies, and blueprints. Hand-drawn plans for converting a school bus into a mobile classroom, complete with measurements, electrical diagrams, and notes written in Elena's precise handwriting. Maya looked around the empty bus, at the rusted walls and broken seats, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave customers at the garage, but the real thing, the kind of smile that meant she'd found her next fight. She pulled out her phone and called her boss at Murphy's Auto Repair. Hey, Jim, it's Maya. I need to take some time off. Family business. She didn't mention that the family business was a 50-year-old school bus, or that she was about to attempt something that had defeated her grandmother decades ago. She just looked at those blueprints, ran her fingers along the measurements Elena had so carefully marked, and whispered to the empty bus, Okay, Abula, let's see what we can build. Outside, Oregon rain drummed against the storage unit roof like applause, and Maya Rodriguez began planning the resurrection of Elena's Learning Express. She had no idea that what she was about to create would not only honor her grandmother's dream, but spark a revolution in how an entire generation of forgotten children would discover their own potential. The broken bus sat silent around her, waiting. But Maya could already hear something in the silence. The sound of children laughing, learning, and finally believing that someone cared enough to meet them exactly where they were. Maya spent the next 3 weeks living between two worlds, her day job at Murphy's Auto Repair and her evenings in Storage Unit 47, where she methodically stripped the bus down to its bones. Every rusted bolt, every cracked seat, every piece of rotted flooring came out with surgical precision. She wasn't just gutting a vehicle, she was performing an autopsy on a dream that died too young. The work was therapeutic in a way that surprised her. After Elena's funeral, Maya had felt lost, like she was drifting through someone else's life. But here, surrounded by metal and possibility, her hands remembered what they were made for. She'd inherited more than Elena's mechanical skills. She'd inherited her grandmother's ability to see potential where others saw only problems. By the end of the first week, the bus was completely hollow. Maya stood in the empty shell, Elena's blueprints spread across a makeshift table she'd fashioned from sawhorses and plywood. The plans were more detailed than she had initially realized. Elena hadn't just dreamed of a mobile classroom, she'd engineered one. The electrical schematics showed solar panels feeding a battery bank that could power LED lighting, a small computer lab, and even climate control. The interior layout maximized every square inch: retractable desks, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on hydraulic systems, a teacher station that converted into a science lab, and storage compartments hidden in every available space. But it was the margin notes that broke Maya's heart and fired her determination. Elena had written observations about specific children. Tommy R. needs extra space for wheelchair. Maria L. learns better with hands-on activities. The Johnson kids respond to music integration. These weren't theoretical plans. They were love letters to real children Elena had taught during those 6 precious months in 1975. Maya pulled out her laptop and started researching. What she discovered made her grandmother's vision seem even more revolutionary. In 2023, Willowbrook's education statistics were worse than ever. The high school had cut its arts program, the elementary school was operating with textbooks from 2015, and nearly 30% of students were chronically absent, not because they didn't want to learn, but because traditional school didn't meet them where they lived. Many families in the area were still transient, following seasonal work in agriculture, construction, or what was left of the timber industry. Their children moved frequently, falling behind academically with each transition. Others lived in rural areas where the school bus route didn't reach, making consistent attendance nearly impossible. Maya spent her lunch breaks visiting these communities, introducing herself as Elena's granddaughter and asking questions. What she heard made her angry and heartbroken in equal measure. At the Riverside Mobile Home Park, she met Sarah Chen, a single mother working 2 jobs who hadn't been able to afford school supplies for her twin boys in 3 years. "They're smart kids," Sarah said, exhaustion evident in every word. "But they're falling behind, and I can't help them with homework I don't understand myself." In the hills outside town, she found the Nakamura family, whose daughter Keiko was a mathematical prodigy trapped in a one-size-fits-all system that moved too slowly for her brilliant mind. She finishes her assignments in 10 minutes, then spends the rest of class bored and disruptive, her father explained. "The teacher says she's gifted, but there's no program for that here." Most heartbreaking was her visit to the Pine Ridge Trailer Court, where she met Marcus Washington, an 8-year-old whose mother had died the previous year. His grandmother, Dorothy, was raising him on Social Security while battling her own health issues. Marcus was bright and curious, but he'd missed so much school caring for Dorothy that he was already labeled a problem student.
"That boy has more wisdom in his little finger than most adults," Dorothy told Maya, watching Marcus tinker with an old radio in the corner. "But the school doesn't see past his absences. They've already written him off, and he's just a baby." Maya left each visit carrying more weight, but also more clarity. Elena's Learning Express wasn't just a good idea, it was essential. These children needed someone to meet them in their world, with their challenges on their terms. Back in the storage unit, Maya began adapting Elena's plans for modern reality. She researched mobile classroom regulations, discovering that while many barriers still existed, some had shifted. The rise of homeschooling and alternative education had created new legal pathways. If she structured it correctly, as a nonprofit supplemental education program rather than a replacement for traditional school, she could navigate most of the regulatory maze. She contacted Dr. Jennifer Adams, an education professor at Oregon State University, who specialized in rural education challenges. Dr. Adams had been researching mobile learning solutions for years and was immediately intrigued by Elena's original concept. "Your grandmother was 40 years ahead of her time," Dr. Adams said during their first phone call. "What she envisioned is exactly what educational researchers are calling for now. Personalized, place-based learning that meets students where they are, literally and figuratively." Dr. Adams offered to help with curriculum development and accreditation issues. More importantly, she introduced Maya to a network of educators, social workers, and community organizers who'd been fighting similar battles across rural Oregon. The financial reality was daunting. Maya's savings account held $3,200, enough for basic materials but nowhere near what she'd need for the full transformation. She applied for small business loans but was rejected repeatedly. Banks didn't understand what she was trying to do, and nonprofit grants required organizational status she didn't yet have. That's when she remembered something Elena used to say: "When the front door is locked, mija, look for the window." Maya started small. She used her mechanical skills to trade labor for materials, rebuilding engines in exchange for electrical supplies, fixing transmissions for lumber, welding for a farmer in exchange for solar panels. She haunted salvage yards and construction sites, rescuing materials that would have been discarded. The Willowbrook community began to take notice. Jim Murphy, her boss, started letting her use the garage's tools after hours. The local diner owner, Betty Kowalski, sent home meals she accidentally overcooked. Hardware store manager Tom Silva began setting aside damaged merchandise he couldn't sell, but Maya could still use. Most surprisingly, former students of Elena's began reaching out. Maya had posted on social media about her project, and people started sharing memories of the original Learning Express. Adults in their 40s and 50s remembered being taught to read in that blue bus, remembered feeling seen and valued in ways traditional school had never provided. "Your grandmother saved my life," wrote David Martinez, now a successful contractor in Portland. "I was a logging camp kid who couldn't sit still in regular classrooms. Elena taught me that my hands could be as smart as my brain. I want to help rebuild her dream." The donations started small, $50 here, $100 there, but they came with stories. Stories of children Elena had reached, lives she had changed, hope she had planted in families who had none. Maya realized she wasn't just rebuilding a bus, she was honoring a legacy that had touched more lives than Elena had ever known. By the end of the second month, Maya had established the Elena Rodriguez Learning Express Foundation, obtained nonprofit status, and raised nearly $15,000 through crowdfunding and community donations. More importantly, she'd assembled a team. Dr. Adams agreed to serve as education director. Marcus Washington's grandmother, Dorothy, despite her health issues, volunteered to help with reading programs. "That boy taught me that wisdom doesn't require fancy degrees," she said.
Sarah Chen offered to handle administrative tasks in exchange for tutoring for her twins. Even teenagers got involved. Keiko Nakamura, the mathematical prodigy, started coming to the storage unit after school to help with calculations and measurements. Her precision and enthusiasm reminded Maya powerfully of Elena, and she began to understand that this project wasn't just about helping children. It was about creating a community where everyone's gifts mattered. The bus shell was ready for reconstruction. Maya had reinforced the frame, installed new flooring, and run preliminary electrical work. Elena's blueprints were evolving into something bigger and more ambitious than even her grandmother had envisioned.
But as Maya stood in the hollow bus one rainy evening, surrounded by plans and possibilities, she felt the first whisper of doubt. Elena had failed to make this work permanently. What made Maya think she could succeed where her brilliant, determined grandmother had fallen short? She picked up the photograph of young Elena, standing proudly beside the original Learning Express, studying her grandmother's face for answers. Elena looked so confident, so certain that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. Maya folded the photograph carefully and placed it in her toolbox. Tomorrow, she would start building. Not just bookshelves and desks, but a bridge across the gaps that had swallowed too many bright minds. She would build Elena's dream bigger, stronger, and more permanent than bureaucrats and regulations could tear down. Outside, the Oregon rain continued its endless percussion against the storage unit roof. But inside, surrounded by the skeleton of possibility, Maya Rodriguez felt something she hadn't experienced since Elena died. Unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what her hands and heart were made for. The real work was about to begin. The first piece of steel Maya cut was a moment of no return. Standing in the empty bus shell with a plasma cutter in her hands, she traced the line where Elena's original wall would have stood. The metal parted like butter, sending sparks cascading across the floor in a shower of orange light. There was something ceremonial about it, the official death of what was and the birth of what could be. Maya had spent weeks perfecting her plans, but holding the actual tools, feeling the weight of metal and possibility in her hands, made everything real in a way blueprints never could. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Every cut, every weld, every decision would determine whether Elena's dream lived or died again. The construction began with the infrastructure, the bones that would support everything else. Maya installed a reinforced floor system with hidden storage compartments beneath, creating space for supplies, personal belongings, and emergency equipment. She learned from visiting other mobile classrooms that storage was always the limiting factor, so she built it into every possible surface. The electrical system was her masterpiece. Using skills she'd developed working on hybrid vehicles at Murphy's garage, Maya created a sophisticated power grid that could run independently for weeks. Solar panels would charge a bank of lithium batteries with a backup generator for cloudy Oregon winters. LED lighting throughout would be dimmable and color adjustable. Research showed that different light spectrums could help children focus or relax depending on the activity. But it was during the second week of construction that Maya faced her first major crisis. The hydraulic system for the retractable desks, a key feature that would allow the space to transform from classroom to computer lab to art studio, simply wouldn't work with the bus's existing framework. Elena's plans had been drawn for a different model of bus, and the structural differences were throwing off all the measurements. Maya spent 3 sleepless nights redesigning the system, drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil, and questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The old doubts crept in again. Was she crazy to think she could improve on Elena's design? Who was she to think she could solve problems that had defeated her grandmother? It was Keiko Nakamura who provided the breakthrough. The 17-year-old mathematical prodigy had been coming to the storage unit every day after school, ostensibly to help with calculations, but really because she'd found a place where her precision and analytical mind were valued rather than seen as disruptive.
Kay wouldn't think about this backwards, Chieko asked one evening, studying Maya's sketches. Instead of making the desks move to fit the space, why not make the space move to fit the students? The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fixed walls with movable furniture, Maya redesigned the interior with modular panels that could be reconfigured in dozens of different ways. The desks became lightweight, stackable units that could create individual workstations, collaborative pods, or open floor space for movement-based learning. The breakthrough energized the entire team. Dr. Adams drove down from Oregon State to see the progress and brought 3 graduate students who were researching adaptive learning environments. Dorothy Washington, despite her arthritis, insisted on hand-sewing cushions for the seating areas. Even Marcus, Dorothy's 8-year-old grandson, contributed by testing every surface to make sure it was kid-proof. Word of the project had spread beyond Willowbrook. A retired aerospace engineer named Frank Sullivan read about Elena's Learning Express in the regional newspaper and drove 4 hours from Portland to volunteer his expertise. Frank had spent 40 years designing efficient use of space in aircraft and spacecraft, and he saw the bus as a fascinating challenge. Space is the ultimate constraint. In spacecraft, we call it multifunctional design. Your grandmother understood this intuitively. Frank helped Maya create storage solutions that seemed to defy physics. Bookshelves that folded out from what appeared to be solid walls, a teacher's desk that converted into a science lab with running water and electrical outlets, seating that transformed into supply cabinets. The bus was becoming something that looked small from the outside, but felt enormous once you understood how to use the space. The most challenging aspect was the technology integration. Maya wanted to create a 21st century learning environment, but she also understood that many of the children who would use the bus came from families without reliable internet or modern devices. The solution was a hybrid approach, high-tech when connectivity allowed, completely functional without it when necessary. She installed a satellite internet system with local wireless broadcasting, allowing the bus to create its own network bubble wherever it parked. Tablets and laptops were housed in charging stations built into the walls, but every lesson could also be taught with analog materials. The interactive whiteboard could display digital content or function as a traditional writing surface. The real innovation was the learning management system that Dr. Adams helped design. It tracked each student's progress individually, adapting to their learning style, pace, and interests. But unlike traditional educational software, it was designed to work offline, syncing progress when connectivity returned. Maya's favorite feature was what she called the curiosity corners, specialized areas designed for different types of learning. The science corner had a microscope that connected to the main display, allowing students to share discoveries with the entire group. The arts area included supplies for everything from painting to music composition. The reading nook was designed to feel like a cozy living room, with soft lighting and comfortable seating that made even reluctant readers want to curl up with a book. But building the physical space was only half the challenge. Maya was learning that the regulatory environment was even more complex than Elena had faced in 1975. Modern safety requirements, insurance mandates, and educational standards created a maze of compliance issues that seemed designed to prevent exactly what she was trying to do. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen, who had been handling administrative tasks for the foundation, discovered that Oregon had recently passed legislation allowing innovative education service districts, experimental programs that could operate outside traditional regulations as long as they met specific outcome requirements and underwent regular evaluation. The application process was grueling. Maya had to demonstrate that Elena's Learning Express would provide educational value equal to or greater than traditional schooling while serving populations that conventional schools struggled to reach. She needed detailed curricula, safety protocols, teacher certification plans, and measurement strategies. Dr. Adams proved invaluable during this phase, helping Maya understand that they weren't just building a mobile classroom, they were creating a new model of education that could be replicated anywhere. The documentation they prepared was exhaustive, but it also forced Maya to think deeply about what they were really trying to accomplish. The goal wasn't to replace traditional education, but to supplement it, to catch children who were falling through the cracks and give them tools to succeed when they returned to conventional classrooms. Elena's Learning Express would be a bridge, not a destination. As spring arrived in Oregon, the bus transformation neared completion. What had started as a rusted shell had become something that looked like it had materialized from the future. The exterior had been painted a deep blue, the same color as Elena's original bus, but with modern graphics that made it look professional and inviting rather than institutional. Inside, the space felt magical. Natural light streamed through skylights Maya had installed in the roof. The modular furniture created cozy learning spaces that could be reconfigured in minutes. Technology was seamlessly integrated, but never overwhelming. Most importantly, it felt warm and welcoming, a place where children would want to spend time. The first test came when Maya invited the families she'd met during her research to tour the completed bus. Marcus Washington was the first child to step inside, his 8-year-old eyes growing wide as he took in the space. "It's like a spaceship," he whispered, "but for learning." Sarah Chen's twins, normally hyperactive and distractible, sat quietly at the science station for 20 minutes, completely absorbed in examining pond water under the microscope. Keiko Nakamura, who had helped build the space, saw it through a child's eyes for the first time and declared it better than any classroom I've ever been in. But the real validation came from Dorothy Washington, Elena's contemporary. She had known the original Learning Express and remembered what it meant to families like hers. She walked through the bus slowly, running her hands along surfaces, testing the lighting, sitting in each learning area. Elena would be so proud, she finally said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. This is what she dreamed of, but bigger, better, smarter. You didn't just rebuild her bus, child. You evolved it. Maya stood in the completed bus that evening, surrounded by the tools and plans that had consumed her life for months. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of official inspection and certification. Soon, if everything went according to plan, Elena's Learning Express would roll out of this storage unit and begin serving children who needed it most. But tonight, in the quiet space filled with possibility, Maya allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. She had taken her grandmother's broken dream and made it whole again. More than that, she had proven to herself that she was capable of building something that mattered, something that would outlast her own doubts and fears. The bus was ready. The question now was whether the world was ready for Elena's Learning Express to start rolling again. The inspection was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like Judgment Day. Maya had been awake since 4, running through every system check, adjusting lighting that didn't need adjusting, and reorganizing supplies that were already perfectly organized. State Inspector Rebecca Martinez arrived precisely on time, accompanied by 2 Education Department officials and a fire safety specialist whose job was to find everything wrong with Maya's months of careful work. Maya had expected bureaucrats in suits who would measure everything against rigid standards designed for traditional buildings. Instead, she found Inspector Martinez crouching under the bus with a flashlight, genuinely curious about the solar panel mounting system and the innovative gray water recycling that Frank Sullivan had helped design.
"I've never seen anything like this," Martinez admitted, running her hands along the hydraulic stabilizing jacks that would level the bus on uneven terrain. "Your electrical work is museum quality. Where did you learn to do this kind of integration?" For 3 hours, they examined every inch of Elena's Learning Express. The fire safety specialist tested the sprinkler system, evacuation routes, and emergency communications equipment. The education officials reviewed curriculum materials, technology interfaces, and assessment protocols. Maya answered hundreds of questions, demonstrated dozens of features, and held her breath as they scribbled notes on clipboards. The moment of truth came when Inspector Martinez sat at the teacher's station, looking through the panoramic windows that gave a 270-degree view of the surrounding area. She was quiet for a long time, just absorbing the space, understanding how it would feel to work here. "This isn't just compliant," she finally said. "This is revolutionary. You've solved problems that traditional classrooms have struggled with for decades. The question isn't whether this meets our standards, it's whether our standards are good enough for what you've built." The provisional operating permit was approved that afternoon, with a requirement for quarterly reviews during the first year. Maya held the official document in trembling hands, reading the words, "Elena Rodriguez Learning Express Foundation, authorized mobile education provider," until they blurred through tears she hadn't expected. But approval was just the beginning. The real test would come when children actually used the space for learning. Maya had lined up her first students, the families she'd met during her research, children who had specific needs that traditional education wasn't meeting. The plan was to start small with just 5 students and gradually expand as they refined their approach. Marcus Washington was the first child to officially attend class in Elena's Learning Express. Dorothy had been nervous about the transition, worried that her grandson might disrupt the high-tech environment or feel intimidated by the unfamiliar space. Those fears evaporated within minutes. Maya had positioned the bus in the Riverside Mobile Home Park, where Marcus and several other children lived. The setting was important. Instead of asking families to come to education, education was coming to them. The bus felt like part of their community, rather than an intrusion from outside. Marcus bounded up the steps with an enthusiasm Maya had not seen since Elena's funeral. The 8-year-old who had been labeled a problem student immediately gravitated toward the hands-on learning stations, his natural curiosity finally finding outlets that traditional desks and worksheets had never provided. The first lesson was intentionally simple, a science exploration of water cycles using local examples. Maya had prepared elaborate digital presentations, interactive simulations, and carefully structured activities. None of that mattered. What mattered was Marcus's face when he realized that the puddles in his neighborhood were part of the same system that created clouds and rain and rivers. "You mean the water I see every day is connected to everything?" he asked, eyes wide with the kind of wonder that made Maya remember why Elena had devoted her life to teaching. Sarah Chen's twins, Jennifer and Jason, presented different challenges. Both were bright but struggled with traditional classroom environments for opposite reasons. Jennifer because she worked too quickly and became bored, Jason because he needed more time to process information and felt constantly behind. In a conventional classroom, there was no way to meet both needs simultaneously. Elena's Learning Express changed everything. The adaptive learning software allowed Jennifer to dive deep into advanced concepts, while Jason worked at his pace on foundational skills, both in the same space, both feeling successful. Maya watched them collaborate on a math problem, Jennifer naturally mentoring Jason without either feeling superior or inferior. But it was Keiko Nakamura who proved the bus's most important capability. The 17-year-old mathematical prodigy had been Maya's volunteer assistant during construction, but she was also a student who needed challenge at a level the local high school couldn't provide. Traditional dual enrollment programs required her to commute to community college, missing social connections with peers her own age. In Elena's Learning Express, Keiko could pursue advanced mathematics and science while also serving as a peer tutor for younger students. The arrangement benefited everyone. Keiko gained teaching experience and social interaction, while younger students learned from someone closer to their own age who remembered what it felt like to struggle with concepts that eventually clicked. The magic moment came during the second week when Maya realized she wasn't teaching 5 separate students. She was facilitating a learning community. Marcus's questions about water cycles led to Jennifer's interest in weather patterns, which connected to Jason's fascination with how weather affected his grandmother's arthritis, which sparked Keiko's research into barometric pressure and its physiological effects. Traditional education would have treated these as separate subjects: science, math, health, personal experience. In Elena's Learning Express, they were all part of the same exploration, each student contributing their perspective and learning from others' insights. Word spread quickly through Willowbrook's networks. Parents who had been skeptical began asking questions. Teachers from the traditional school district started making unofficial visits, curious about the bus they'd heard was doing something different. Even students from conventional classrooms began hanging around when Elena's Learning Express was parked in their neighborhoods. The breakthrough moment came when Lisa Thompson, a veteran third-grade teacher from Willowbrook Elementary, asked if she could observe a session. Lisa had been teaching for 23 years and had grown frustrated with standardized curricula that left no room for creativity or individual needs. Maya was nervous about the visit. She respected traditional educators and didn't want Elena's Learning Express to be seen as competition or criticism of conventional schools. Lisa put those fears to rest immediately.
"I'm not here to judge," she said quietly, watching Marcus explain his water cycle discoveries to Jason. "I'm here to learn. You're doing things I've wanted to try for years but couldn't because of regulations, class sizes, and standardized testing requirements." The collaboration that emerged surprised everyone. Lisa began spending her lunch breaks on the bus, working with Dr. Adams to adapt some of Elena's Learning Express techniques for traditional classroom use. In return, she helped Maya understand state curriculum standards and how to document student progress in ways that would transfer smoothly if children moved back to conventional schools. More importantly, Lisa became an advocate within the traditional education system. When school board members expressed concerns about the mobile classroom disrupting their programs, Lisa spoke passionately about how Elena's Learning Express was actually supporting their mission by reaching children who weren't thriving in conventional settings. The first crisis came in month 3. Jacob Morrison, a 9-year-old from a logging family, had been attending sessions regularly and making remarkable progress in reading. His family's work schedule was unpredictable, sometimes requiring them to move to different sites with little notice. Traditional school treated these absences as truancy, but Elena's Learning Express had been flexible, meeting Jacob wherever his family's work took them. The problem arose when Jacob's father got a job offer that would require the family to move 2 hours away, outside Elena's Learning Express service area. In a traditional system, Jacob would simply transfer schools, usually falling behind during the transition. But Jacob didn't want to leave the learning community he'd found, and his academic gains were so significant that losing momentum seemed tragic. Maya spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to solve an impossible problem. She couldn't expand their service area without additional buses, drivers, and funding they didn't have, but she also couldn't bear the thought of Jacob losing the educational support that was finally working for him. The solution came from an unexpected source. Frank Sullivan, the retired aerospace engineer who had helped with the bus design, had been quietly working on his own project. Using Maya's blueprints and his aerospace connections, he had been building a second mobile classroom in his Portland workshop. "I've been in aerospace for 4 decades, Frank told Maya during an emotional phone call. "I've seen how innovation spreads. One successful prototype leads to a fleet. Elena's Learning Express isn't just one bus serving one community. It's a proof of concept for a new way of thinking about education." Frank's bus would be ready in 6 weeks. Jacob's family could wait that long for their move, giving Maya time to train new staff and establish partnerships in their destination community. Elena's Learning Express was about to become a network. But scaling success brought new challenges Maya hadn't anticipated. Funding requirements multiplied. Insurance became more complex. State oversight intensified. Most importantly, Maya realized she was facing the same systemic barriers that had defeated Elena 50 years earlier, just in more sophisticated forms. The bureaucratic pressure was intense, but it wasn't what kept Maya awake at night. What haunted her was a deeper question. How do you preserve the magic of a small personal learning community when everyone wants you to grow bigger and serve more children? How do you scale love?
Standing in the bus one late evening, watching Marcus show Jennifer how to use the microscope, while Keiko helped Jason with algebra and Dorothy Washington read stories to a group of younger children, Maya understood that Elena's Learning Express had already succeeded beyond her grandmother's wildest dreams. The question now wasn't whether they could continue, it was whether they could grow without losing the very qualities that made them special. Maya looked at the photo of young Elena standing beside the original blue bus, searching her grandmother's confident smile for guidance about challenges Elena had never faced. Tomorrow would bring new students, new communities, and new questions about what education could become when it was designed around children's needs rather than institutional convenience. Tonight, though, Maya allowed herself to celebrate a truth that no bureaucrat could regulate away. Learning happened best when children felt seen, valued, and supported exactly as they were. Elena's Learning Express was no longer just a bus, it was becoming a movement. The first sign of trouble came disguised as good news. Maya was refueling the bus at Thompson's gas station when Principal Margaret Whitfield from Willowbrook Elementary approached her with what appeared to be a friendly smile. Margaret had been the principal for 12 years, and while she'd never been openly hostile to Elena's Learning Express, she'd never been supportive either. "Maya, dear," she said, her voice carrying the particular tone educators use when they're about to deliver unwelcome news diplomatically, "I've been hearing such wonderful things about your little program. The school board would love to discuss how we might coordinate our efforts." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday in the district conference room. Maya arrived with Dr. Adams and a folder full of student progress reports, expecting a collaborative discussion about how Elena's Learning Express could support the traditional school system. What she found instead was an ambush. 7 board members sat around a polished table that probably cost more than Maya's first-year budget. At the head sat Richard Blackwood, a local real estate developer whose children attended private school in Portland, but who somehow appointed himself guardian of Willowbrook's public education standards. "Miss Rodriguez," Blackwood began without preamble, "we've received some concerning reports about your operation. While we appreciate your enthusiasm for education, we have serious questions about whether this mobile classroom is in compliance with state learning standards and whether it might be creating unfair competition for our district schools." Maya had prepared for questions about curriculum and outcomes. She wasn't prepared for the accusation that followed.
Furthermore, continued board member Janet Sterling, a woman whose own children had graduated decades ago, but who treated every education decision as a personal affront, "We've heard complaints from parents that your program is creating divisions in our community. Some families feel pressured to enroll their children in your bus because others are seeing dramatic improvements, while families who can't access your services feel left behind." The irony was stunning. For 50 years, Willowbrook's education system had left children behind with bureaucratic indifference. Now that someone was actually reaching those forgotten students, the system was concerned about fairness. Dr. Adams tried to respond with diplomatic professionalism, explaining that Elena's Learning Express was designed to supplement, not replace, traditional education. She presented data showing that students who participated in the mobile classroom actually performed better when they returned to conventional classes, bringing enthusiasm and skills that benefited all students. None of it mattered. Maya realized halfway through the presentation that this wasn't a fact-finding meeting. This was a power play disguised as concern for educational equity. The real agenda became clear when Blackwood revealed that the district was applying for a federal grant to implement their own innovative education initiative. Elena's Learning Express, with its proven success and growing reputation, was apparently threatening their narrative that they were the educational innovators in the region. "We're prepared to offer you a solution," Sterling announced, with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their own authority. The district would be willing to incorporate your bus into our transportation fleet. You could work as a contractor, following our curriculum guidelines and schedules. It would legitimize your work while ensuring proper oversight. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had heard this offer before, not directly, but in Elena's journals. The same language, the same promises of legitimacy and support, the same underlying threat that unauthorized education couldn't be tolerated indefinitely. "What if I decline?" Maya asked quietly. Blackwood's smile never wavered. "Well, we'd hate to see you face the regulatory challenges that could arise. Insurance requirements, safety inspections, curriculum audits. It's so much paperwork for a small operation to handle independently." The meeting ended with Maya promising to consider their proposal, but she walked out of that conference room feeling something she hadn't experienced since Elena's death: pure, clarifying anger. The campaign against Elena's Learning Express began subtly. Anonymous complaints were filed with the state education department, triggering surprise inspections that found nothing wrong but consumed days of Maya's time responding to bureaucratic inquiries. Insurance companies suddenly questioned policy renewals, citing increased risk profiles for non-traditional educational providers. Most insidiously, rumors began circulating through Willowbrook's gossip networks. Parents were told that children who attended the mobile classroom might have trouble transferring back to regular schools. Questions were raised about whether the unconventional teaching methods might leave students unprepared for standardized tests. Maya watched enrollment drop from 15 students to 8, then to 5. Families who had been thrilled with their children's progress suddenly became nervous about being different, about standing out in a small community where conformity was often safer than excellence. The breaking point came when Dorothy Washington called Maya in tears. Marcus had been thriving in Elena's Learning Express, reading at grade level for the first time in his life, and showing natural aptitude for scientific observation. But Dorothy had received a visit from a social worker investigating an anonymous report that Marcus was being denied access to appropriate education. "They're saying I'm being neglected by not sending him to regular school," Dorothy sobbed into the phone. "That woman made me feel like I was hurting my own grandson by letting him learn somewhere he was happy." Maya drove to Dorothy's trailer that evening, finding the elderly woman sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by official forms and notices. Marcus was in his room, the enthusiasm and curiosity that had bloomed over months now replaced by the same withdrawn silence he'd shown before Elena's Learning Express entered his life. "They want him back in regular classes by Monday. Said if I don't comply, they'll have to evaluate whether I'm providing adequate care. I can't lose him, Maya. He's all I got left." Maya held the reports in her hands, seeing through the bureaucratic language to the coordinated effort beneath. Someone had weaponized the child protection system against a family whose only crime was finding educational success outside approved channels. That night, Maya sat in the empty bus, staring at Elena's photograph and feeling the weight of history repeating itself. Her grandmother had faced the same systematic opposition, the same regulatory harassment, the same impossible choice between fighting the system and protecting the children she served. The easy path would be to accept the district's offer, to become a contractor providing mobile services under their oversight. Elena's Learning Express would continue to exist, technically, but as a neutered version of itself, constrained by the same limitations that had failed these children in the first place. Maya was contemplating that compromise when her phone rang. Dr. Adams was calling from Oregon State University, where she'd been researching similar mobile education programs across the country. "Maya, you need to know what's happening elsewhere," Dr. Adams said, her voice tight with excitement and urgency. "There are 17 mobile classroom programs operating in 7 states. Guess how many have faced the exact same regulatory harassment you're experiencing? The answer was all of them. Every successful mobile education initiative had triggered the same response from traditional school districts: offers of incorporation followed by bureaucratic pressure designed to force compliance or closure. But Dr. Adams had more than just confirmation of the pattern. She had been contacted by education advocates from across the region who were monitoring Willowbrook's situation. Elena's Learning Express had become a test case, watched by researchers, policymakers, and other communities considering similar programs.
There's a legal defense fund, Dr. Adams continued. 3 education law firms specializing in innovative program protection. They want to represent you pro bono because they understand that what happens to Elena's Learning Express will determine whether any community can develop educational alternatives that actually serve children's needs. The decision Maya faced wasn't just about her bus or her students. It was about whether communities would be allowed to innovate when traditional systems failed, or whether the bureaucratic immune system would successfully eliminate any challenges to institutional authority. Maya looked around the empty bus, at the learning stations that had sparked joy in children who'd been written off by conventional education, at the flexible spaces that had allowed different kinds of minds to thrive together. She thought about Marcus's face when he'd made his first scientific discovery, about Keiko's pride in mentoring younger students, about Dorothy's tears of fear and frustration. Then she thought about Elena's journal entry from 1975. "They'll bury us before they let it fly." Not this time. Maya called the legal defense team that night, accepting their offer of representation. She called Dr. Adams and asked her to coordinate with media contacts who might be interested in covering the story of a mobile classroom under attack. Most importantly, she called every family whose children had been touched by Elena's Learning Express, asking them to share their experiences publicly. The response surprised everyone, including Maya. Parents who had been intimidated into silence by official pressure suddenly found their voices when they realized they weren't alone. Dorothy Washington, despite her fears about losing Marcus, agreed to speak at a school board meeting about the transformation she'd witnessed in her grandson. Local newspapers picked up the story, then regional outlets, then national education publications. The narrative that emerged wasn't what the school board had expected. Instead of portraying Elena's Learning Express as an unauthorized disruption, reporters were asking why traditional schools were working so hard to eliminate a program that was demonstrably helping children succeed. The legal battle was just beginning, but Maya had learned something important from her grandmother's failure 50 years earlier. Elena had fought alone, believing that good work would speak for itself. Maya understood that good work needed allies, advocates, and a community willing to defend the right to innovation. Standing in the bus that had become the center of a much larger fight, Maya made a promise to Elena's memory and to every child who would benefit from educational options that met them where they were rather than where institutions demanded they be. Elena's Learning Express wouldn't be buried again. This time, it would fly. The courtroom in Salem looked exactly like what Maya had expected from television dramas. Polished wood, intimidating height, and an atmosphere that made ordinary people feel small. She sat at the defendant's table beside Rebecca Chen, the education rights attorney who'd volunteered to represent Elena's Learning Express, trying not to fidget with the folder of documents that represented months of legal preparation. Across the aisle, the Willowbrook School District had assembled what looked like a small army. 3 attorneys in expensive suits, a briefcase-carrying paralegal, and Superintendent James Morrison, who'd driven down from the state capitol specifically for this hearing. The message was clear. They took this threat to their authority very seriously. Judge Patricia Summers entered precisely at 9 a.m., her gray hair pulled back severely and her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts on the case that had attracted statewide attention. Maya had researched Judge Summers extensively, a former teacher herself who'd spent 15 years in the classroom before law school. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to education regulations.
The district's attorney, William Hartley, presented their case with polished confidence. Elena's Learning Express, he argued, represented an unauthorized school operating outside state oversight, potentially endangering children through unaccredited curriculum and inadequate safety protocols. The district wasn't trying to eliminate innovation, he insisted, but to ensure that all educational programs met the same rigorous standards that protected Oregon's children. Hartley's presentation was sophisticated, filled with citations of education law and precedents involving other mobile programs that had been successfully incorporated into traditional districts. He painted a picture of responsible oversight versus reckless independence, of trained professionals versus well-meaning amateurs who didn't understand the complexities of childhood education. Your Honor, he concluded, the defendants ask this court to create a dangerous precedent that anyone with good intentions can establish an educational program without oversight, accountability, or adherence to the standards this state has developed through decades of careful policy making. The welfare of children cannot be left to individual interpretation of what constitutes adequate education. Maya felt her confidence waver as Hartley spoke. His arguments sounded reasonable, even responsible. Who was she, after all, to challenge a system run by trained professionals with advanced degrees in education? The old doubts crept in. Maybe I was just a mechanic playing at being an educator. Maybe Elena's dream was too naive for the complex realities of modern education policy. Then Rebecca Chen stood to present their defense, and everything changed. Chen didn't dispute that Elena's Learning Express operated differently from traditional schools. Instead, she argued that Oregon's own laws specifically allowed for innovative educational programs that served populations inadequately reached by conventional systems. She presented evidence that Maya had scrupulously followed all applicable regulations for supplemental education providers and had exceeded safety standards required for mobile learning environments. But the real power of Chen's argument came when she began calling witnesses. Dorothy Washington was the first to testify. The elderly woman walked slowly to the witness stand, her arthritis making each step deliberate, but her voice was strong and clear as she described Marcus's transformation. Before Elena's Learning Express, my grandson was failing in school and didn't care, Dorothy said, looking directly at Judge Summers. Teachers said if he was behind, disruptive, probably headed for special education or worse. In that bus, he discovered he was smart, just smart in ways that regular classrooms don't recognize. He's reading now, asking questions about everything, dreaming about becoming a scientist. They want to take that away and put him back in a system that was failing him. How is that protecting children? Sarah Chen followed, describing how her twins had gone from struggling with different learning paces to supporting each other in an environment that met both their needs simultaneously. Then came Dr. Adams, presenting research on mobile education effectiveness and explaining how Elena's Learning Express had achieved learning outcomes that exceeded state averages for similar demographic populations. The testimony that changed the courtroom atmosphere came from an unexpected source. Lisa Thompson, the veteran third-grade teacher from Willowbrook Elementary, had asked to speak despite pressure from her district not to get involved. "I've been teaching for 23 years, Lisa said, her voice quiet but steady. I've seen what works and what doesn't. What Maya Rodriguez has created in that bus is everything I've wanted to do in my classroom but couldn't because of regulations, class sizes, and standardized testing requirements. Elena's Learning Express isn't competing with public education. It's showing us what public education could become if we put children's needs before institutional convenience." Judge Summers leaned forward. "Ms. Thompson, are you suggesting that traditional schools are inadequate?" "I'm suggesting that one size doesn't fit all. We have brilliant children falling through cracks not because we don't care, but because our system isn't designed for flexibility. Maya found a way to catch those children and help them succeed. Instead of shutting her down, we should be learning from her." The district's rebuttal focused on regulatory precedent and the potential chaos that could result if every community decided to create its own educational alternatives. Hartley argued that exceptions to established systems, no matter how well-intentioned, weakened the foundation of public education and created unfair advantages for some children while leaving others behind. Maya listened to the legal arguments swirling around her and realized this case was about much more than one mobile classroom in a small Oregon town. This was about whether innovation was allowed when institutions failed, whether communities could develop solutions that met their specific needs, whether good results mattered more than proper procedures. During the lunch recess, Maya sat in her truck outside the courthouse, staring at a text message from Frank Sullivan in Portland. His second bus was complete and ready for deployment, but 3 other communities that had expressed interest were now waiting to see the outcome of this case before proceeding. Atlanta's Learning Express had inadvertently become the test case for mobile education across the Pacific Northwest. The afternoon session brought a surprise that neither side had anticipated. Judge Summers announced that she had requested additional testimony from state education officials about current policies regarding innovative learning programs. Deputy Superintendent Maria Valdez took the stand and described Oregon's recent efforts to encourage educational innovation, particularly for underserved populations in rural areas. Under questioning from both attorneys, she revealed that the state had been quietly monitoring Atlanta's Learning Express as a potential model for broader implementation. Our assessment shows exceptional outcomes, Valdez testified. Students participating in the mobile classroom program demonstrate improved engagement, academic progress, and social-emotional development. The program appears to be achieving exactly what our innovation initiatives are designed to encourage. Judge Summers asked the question that cut to the heart of the case. Deputy Superintendent, in your professional opinion, does Atlanta's Learning Express represent a threat to public education or an enhancement of it? Valdez paused, clearly aware that her answer would influence not just this case, but state policy going forward. Your Honor, I believe it represents the future of public education. Flexible, responsive, community-based programs that meet children where they are, rather than expecting all children to fit the same mold. The district's concerns about oversight are valid, but they can be addressed through collaboration rather than elimination. The final arguments came the next morning. Hartley maintained that good intentions and positive results couldn't override the need for systematic oversight and regulatory compliance. Chen argued that Oregon's own laws supported innovative programs that achieved superior outcomes while serving populations that traditional schools struggled to reach. Maya was asked to make a personal statement before Judge Summers rendered her decision. Standing in that formal courtroom, surrounded by legal precedent and institutional authority, Maya felt Elena's presence as powerfully as if her grandmother was sitting in the gallery behind her. Your Honor, my grandmother tried to do this 50 years ago. She had to stop because people convinced her that good work wasn't enough if it didn't fit their rules. But the children she taught in that original Learning Express never forgot what it felt like to have someone believe in their potential. I didn't rebuild this bus to compete with schools or challenge authority. I did it because there are still children falling through cracks, still families being told their kids just aren't suited for learning, still communities being left behind by systems that work for some but not for all. Atlanta's Learning Express works. It works for children who've been written off, for families who've lost hope, for communities that deserve better than being told there's only one way to educate their kids. If that's dangerous, if that's a threat to public education, then maybe we need to ask ourselves what we're really trying to protect. Judge Summers retired to consider her decision, leaving Maya and her supporters to wait in the courthouse hallway with the weight of much more than one legal case hanging in the balance.
3 hours later, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Summers looked directly at Maya as she began to speak, and in that moment, Maya knew that Atlanta's Learning Express would either be vindicated or destroyed by the words that followed. The future of innovative education in Oregon, and potentially far beyond, hung on the decision of one judge who understood that some fights are about much more than law. They're about whether communities have the right to care for their children in ways that actually work.
Judge Summers' voice cut through the tension in the courtroom like a blade through silence. Maya held her breath, feeling the weight of Elena's dreams, the hopes of countless children, and the future of educational innovation balanced on the words that would follow. In the matter of Willowbrook School District versus Elena Rodriguez Learning Express Foundation, Judge Summers began, her tone measured and deliberate. This court has carefully considered the arguments presented by both parties, the testimony of witnesses, and the broader implications of this case for educational policy in Oregon. Maya's hands gripped the edge of the defendant's table, knuckles white against the polished wood. Behind her, she could hear Dorothy Washington's quiet breathing, Sarah Chen's whispered prayer, and the rustling of papers as reporters prepared to capture a decision that would ripple far beyond this small courtroom. The plaintiff district argues that consistent oversight and regulatory compliance are essential for protecting children's welfare and maintaining educational standards. This court does not dispute the importance of these concerns. However, the evidence presented demonstrates that the defendant program not only meets but exceeds safety requirements and achieves superior educational outcomes for the populations it serves. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Maya felt Rebecca Chen's hand briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture of cautious optimism. Judge Summers continued, "More significantly, Oregon law specifically encourages innovative educational approaches that serve underserved populations through alternative methodologies. The Elena Rodriguez Learning Express Foundation operates within established legal frameworks for supplemental education providers and has demonstrated exceptional compliance with applicable regulations." Maya's heart began to race as she realized the direction of the judge's reasoning. Furthermore, this court notes that the state's own education officials have endorsed this program as a model for future innovation. Deputy Superintendent Valdez's testimony made clear that eliminating successful alternative programs would contradict Oregon's stated policy of encouraging educational diversity and community-based solutions. Judge Summers paused, looking directly at the district's legal team before continuing. However, the plaintiff's concerns about coordination and oversight have merit. Therefore, this court rules that the Elena Rodriguez Learning Express Foundation may continue operations provided that it enters into a collaborative agreement with the Willowbrook School District to ensure curriculum alignment and student transition support. This partnership will be overseen by the State Education Department to ensure that both innovation and accountability are maintained. The courtroom erupted. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as the full meaning of the decision sank in. Elena's Learning Express could continue, but more than that, it would be officially recognized as a legitimate educational alternative, protected by law and supported by the very system that had tried to eliminate it. Dorothy Washington was sobbing openly in the gallery, her relief palpable after months of fearing she might lose Marcus to bureaucratic intimidation. Sarah Chen hugged her twins, who had been anxiously waiting to hear whether their learning community would survive. Dr. Adams was already on her phone, presumably calling colleagues across the country who had been monitoring this case as a potential precedent. But the most profound moment came when Principal Margaret Whitfield approached Maya in the courthouse hallway after the session ended. The woman who had initially seemed supportive before revealing her true allegiance to district authority now looked genuinely humbled. "Maya," Whitfield said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was so focused on protecting our institution that I lost sight of what institutions are supposed to serve. Your bus is doing what we should have been doing all along, actually meeting children's needs instead of expecting them to meet ours." The partnership that emerged over the following months transformed not just Elena's Learning Express, but the entire Willowbrook education ecosystem. Instead of competing with the mobile classroom, traditional teachers began visiting to learn about adaptive learning techniques and flexible classroom design. Students moved fluidly between conventional and alternative settings based on their individual needs rather than arbitrary assignments. Most remarkably, the collaboration sparked innovations within the traditional schools themselves. Lisa Thompson was granted permission to pilot a flexible learning lab based on Elena's Learning Express principles. Other teachers began advocating for smaller class sizes, interdisciplinary projects, and assessment methods that measured growth rather than standardized performance. The success in Willowbrook attracted national attention. Education researchers arrived to study the integration model, curious about how a small rural district had managed to bridge the gap between innovation and institutional stability. Frank Sullivan's second bus launched in a farming community near Portland, using Willowbrook as a template for community partnership rather than institutional confrontation. Within 2 years, Elena's Learning Express had evolved from a single mobile classroom into a network of 17 buses serving rural communities across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Each maintained the core principles of meeting children where they were, adapting to individual learning styles, and building community connections, but each also reflected the specific needs and culture of its location. Maya found herself traveling frequently, training new teachers and mechanics in the Elena's Learning Express methodology, consulting with communities considering their own mobile programs, and speaking at education conferences about the intersection of innovation and institutional change.
The most gratifying moment came during the program's 3rd anniversary celebration. The event was held in Willowbrook's Community Center, which hadn't seen such a crowd in decades. Former students who had aged out of the program returned to share their stories. Marcus Washington, now 11 and thriving in middle school, presented a science project on water conservation that had won a statewide competition. Kiko Nakamura, completing her senior year, announced her acceptance to MIT with a full scholarship, crediting her teaching experience on Elena's Learning Express with shaping her passion for educational innovation. But it was Dorothy Washington's speech that brought the house down. The elderly woman who had once feared losing her grandson to bureaucratic intimidation now served on the State Advisory Board for Alternative Education Programs. 3 years ago, they told me my Marcus was a problem child who would never succeed in school, Dorothy said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. Today, he's teaching other children how to use microscopes and asking questions that make college professors think twice. Elena's Learning Express didn't just save one boy's education, it saved his belief in himself. And once a child believes they can learn, there's no limit to what they can achieve. Maya stood at the back of the room, watching the celebration of a dream that had taken 3 generations to fully realize. Elena's original vision, her grandmother's interrupted legacy, and Maya's determination to finish what had been started had converged into something larger than any of them could have imagined alone. The speech Maya gave that night was brief, but captured the essence of what Elena's Learning Express had become. My grandmother Elena had a simple belief that every child deserves to be met where they are, valued for who they are, and supported to become who they're meant to be. She tried to make that belief reality in 1975, but the world wasn't ready for her vision. 50 years later, we've proven that her dream wasn't naive or impractical. It was just ahead of its time. Elena's Learning Express works because it remembers something our education system sometimes forgets, that learning is fundamentally about relationships, curiosity, and hope. When children feel seen and supported, when their individual strengths are recognized and developed, when their families are partners rather than problems to be solved, incredible things happen. This isn't the end of Elena's story. It's the beginning of a new chapter, written by every child who discovers their potential in one of our buses
every family who finds hope where they'd lost it, every community that decides their children deserve better than being told there's only one way to learn. My grandmother Elena couldn't finish her dream because she fought alone. We've succeeded because we fought together. Elena's Learning Express belongs to all of us now. Every teacher who dares to innovate, every parent who advocates for their child's needs, every community that refuses to accept that some children are just destined to fall behind. As the celebration wound down and families drifted home through the Oregon evening, Maya walked out to the original bus, now parked permanently behind the community center as both workspace and monument. The exterior had been repainted to match Elena's original design, deep blue with murals of books, stars, and children's faces. The banner reading Elena's Learning Express in bold white letters. Inside, the space remained functional, still hosting after-school programs and community workshops. But Maya's favorite addition was a small display case containing Elena's original journal, the faded photographs from 1975, and a simple placard reading, "Dreams deferred are not dreams denied. They are seeds waiting for the right season to grow." Maya stood in the driver's seat where it all began, holding the photograph of young Elena standing beside this bus 50 years earlier. The circle was complete, but the story was far from over. Across the country, other communities were starting their own mobile programs. Other dreamers were challenging systems that had forgotten their purpose. Other children were discovering that they were capable of far more than anyone had imagined. Elena Rodriguez wanted to prove that learning didn't need four walls and bureaucratic approval. Maya Rodriguez had proven that innovation could survive institutional resistance if it served children's real needs rather than adult convenience. The next generation would prove that when communities dare to dream beyond the limitations they've been told to accept, there is no limit to what children can achieve. The mechanic who inherited a rusty school bus had done more than honor her grandmother's memory. She had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful classrooms are the ones built with love, determination, and the revolutionary belief that every child's potential is worth fighting for. Elena's Learning Express rolled on, carrying dreams toward horizons that stretched as far as human hope could reach. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.